It's one of the greatest mysteries in rock and roll history. Until now. Welcome to the Tainted Tavern.
Oh, coming to the Tainted Tavern, come raise a glass with me. We may not put the world to right, but we'll sure give it a go.
Okay, the other day I was sitting here minding my own business, debating on whether I should use a little bit of money I had to put it towards the rent or blow it on a bottle of scotch. The scotch won. I believe the bailiffs are due Friday afternoon. But all of a sudden there was a knock on the door and in walks this dame, and what a dame. She was the kind of dame that when you looked at her you could feel movement against the loose change in your trouser pocket. Mr. Sledgehammer, she said. Now what I should have done at that point, what I positively should have done is I should have shook my head and said no. I should have said Sledgehammer's the weirdo who lives next door, he's got too many cats. And when he put his bins out, they smelled worse than the bottom of my aquarium. But I didn't. I simply nodded. She threw down a folder on my desk. I looked down. On the front of this folder was a photo of a disheveled-looking man. He looked like he was in need of a good hairdresser and a wash. His name's Zeeb Parkes, she said, or at least that's what we think is his name. We don't know if it's his real name. He used to be a singer with an heavy metal band called Witchfinder General, and I've got to find him. I've got to track him down. No, I don't know shit about heavy metal. I'm more your Michael Bublé sort of guy. But as I say, I was enjoying looking at this dame. My eyes were drinking it all in. She was setting off all kinds of fireworks in my pre-marked tidy-whities. And so I smiled. And I took the case. Okay, now Witchfinder General are a pretty amazing heavy metal band. And pretty everything about them is mystery. Whenever I'm researching an heavy metal band for a video such as this, I usually use this book. Now, it's not entirely comprehensive, but it's a pretty decent book. And that is The Rough Guide to Heavy Metal Music, written by S.E. Bullion. Now, Witchfinder General are not even mentioned in this. So let me tell you a bit about Witchfinder General. Witchfinder General were an heavy metal band formed in 1979 in Stourbridge. By 1984, they had all but fallen apart and split up, although they did make a comeback in 2008 and release a third album called Resurrection. But by that time, they lost their original vocalist, and their original vocalist is the focus of this video because I believe that I finally tracked down the identity of the mysterious Zeeb Parkes. But before we get into it, let's show the original two albums that Witchfinder General released. Now these albums are pretty amazing really, because Witchfinder General sounded a lot like Black Sabbath, and the vocalist, that is Zeeb Parkes, sounded a lot like a young Ozzy Osbourne, and I think this was pretty much intentional. Now the albums that Witchfinder General released were controversial, very controversial, not so much because of the music, but because of the crazy artwork they used on their album covers. They used a page 3 girl. They used a page 3 model, Joanne Latham, for the covers of both of their first two albums. And they went to a church, a graveyard in Stourbridge, and filmed this scene, this photograph for the album cover, in which Joanne Latham, playing a medieval wench, is ripped, she's topless, and looks like she's being sacrificed to the gods. The problem was they didn't get permission from the church to do this, and the police were called. But it's quite, I'm going to show you, I've got a picture disc of their first album, Death Penalty, and I've got to hold my fingers in a rather curious position not to trigger off a problem with YouTube. But mind you, holding my fingers by here is kind of sexy all in itself. But there's the first album, and that would have been the front album cover this year on a picture disc, and there is the back. And as you can see, the model here, it's a very campy horror film type cover design, because much in the mold of, say, Hammer movies or Amicus movies, because Witchfinder General took their name, like Black Sabbath, incidentally, which were the band that mostly influenced them, but they took their name from a British or a classic movie, that is Witchfinder General, of course, which starred Vincent Price. Okay, the second album wasn't quite as racy, and the models were kept clothed, largely because of the backlash that the first album cover received. And on the back you see there the police dragging the band into a van. This was likely staged, but it represented what really happened with that first cover shoot. And when you get inside, I've got to put my fingers in a strategic place again when you get into the middle of the gatefold, but there's the cover again. Now musically the band are, to be honest, they're pretty good, and they seem to be the missing link, the missing doom metal link between Black Sabbath and then the later doom metal groups that came later. Witchfinder General sits firmly in the middle of there. Now, the lead singer, and this is the mystery, the lead singer's name was Zeeb Parkes, but what we found out later was that his name wasn't there. And I made some notes here, so if you see me glancing down, I'm just checking back at my notes. But because this is quite a comprehensive story that I've got to tell you. And after extensive investigation, well, a couple of hours on the internet, I've discovered the real identity of Zeeb Parkes. I also discovered that Elon Musk was actually a reptilian shapeshifter from the planet Zug, and that the birds we see in the sky these days are not real, because apparently in the 1950s the government killed all the birds, and the birds we see now are actually drones, organic drones used to spy on us, but that's another story. But I was able to track down Zeeb Parkes because Zeeb Parkes was a pseudonym. He wasn't a real man. It was a pseudonym of a young musician, a young vocalist, and when Witchfinder General fell apart in 1984, he wanted to keep his anonymity, and he wanted to stay out of the limelight. He'd retired from music, and as you will discover in a moment, he had a far more lucrative gig to move into. So his identity was kept a secret. Zeeb Parkes, a.k.a. the Lord of the Underworld, I believe, and I believe I can prove it here today, was none other than this man. Yes, Tony Blair. The Lord of the Underworld was really Zeeb Parkes. My evidence for this is that the second Witchfinder General album was called Fiends. Now, the second Witchfinder General album was called Friends of Hell. Now, Friends of Hell also happened to be the code word for Tony Blair's inner cabinet, his secret cabinet, and it was made up of the likes of Brown, Mandelson, and Campbell. Also, when Zeeb Parkes, according to studio technicians, was trying to, because he wrote most of the songs, Tony Blair wrote most of the songs for Witchfinder General, but in his days as Zeeb Parkes, when he was trying to teach the rest of the band the chords, his catchphrase was education, 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 which he would later use when he became the leader of the Labour Party. Weapons of mass destruction. Now, Phil Cope's guitar playing on many of Witchfinder General's songs could actually constitute a weapon of mass destruction. But when Witchfinder General decided to reform many years later, they thought, oh, this time we're going to make it, because how can we not? Our vocalist is the Prime Minister of Great Britain. But what they discovered was that Tony Blair wasn't interested. He didn't want to go back to the rock and roll lifestyle. He was too busy searching for weapons of mass destruction. And so Witchfinder General had to recruit a new vocalist called Gary Martin, and basically their album in 2008, Resurrection, didn't chart in any of the major music markets, and it pretty much died a death, as did their first two albums. Their first two albums, they were getting a lot of press at first, and they probably should have been a lot more successful than they were. They were part of the new wave of British heavy metal movement, alongside acts like Saxon, Iron Maiden, and Witchfinder General were up there maybe with those bands. But the problem with Witchfinder General with Tony Blair's band was that where Saxon and Iron Maiden especially progressed onwards, Witchfinder General didn't. For they both two albums, the two major albums, and we'd ignore in Resurrection because Tony Blair wasn't a part of that. As I say, at that stage, he was too busy waging war all over the world to be bothered to pick up his axe again and bang out a few chords and scream some doom metal vocals into the microphone. Now, other evidence that I have for this is that Zeeb Parkes, which, as I say, was a pseudonym which Tony Blair used for his work with Witchfinder General. He got that nickname of Zeeb because at the time he liked to wear black and white striped rugby shirts. So his nickname became Zebra because of the stripes, and then that was eventually shortened to Zeeb. Now, Sherry Blair has famously said in one interview that Tony Blair had a fetish for black and white argyle socks. So the evidence is all there for you to find. And when, during the Cool Britannia movement, Tony Blair had Oasis over to Downing Street for champagne, he really had an ulterior motive because he wanted Oasis to bring their roadies so their roadies could lug his own stack of Marshall amps up from the cellars of 10 Downing Street. So there you have it, proof positive that Zeeb Parkes, the enigmatic vocalist with the short-lived heavy metal band Witchfinder General, was actually Tony Blair. Don't forget, you heard it here first, and please give this video a thumbs up. Leave a comment down below what you think of this conspiracy theory. Do you think there's any truth in it? And also, if you haven't done so already, then please subscribe to this channel. Thanks for watching. Cheers, Yaki Dar, and come back soon.
Please come back soon.